Thank you for joining us again. My name is Torbjørn Andersen. I'm coming from KPMG. We have been asked to give you a 50-minute crash introduction to Norwegian tax and other issues that you should be aware of. So I will be dealing with that now. I'm in general working with companies like yourselves on Norwegian projects. So I've been asked to give you this introduction so that everybody has at least some kind of heads up as to what issues you need to be aware of. Now, this is my insurance company. They have asked me to tell you that this is not specific advice. This is something else. This is information. Okay, so don't use this and go home and think you know it all, but at least you have some information. We will cover a lot of things, but some we will cover more than others. And I've been especially asked to talk about Social Security, so a little bit about labor legislation and social dumping, and this joint and several liability, which is special for Norway, I think. Tax, VAT, accounting is not that important now. This is more solvable. These other things are also has a cultural aspect, which both Jernbaneverket has experienced from other projects and ourselves. That is important that the foreign companies that come to Norway, that they understand these issues. The reporting obligations that you will have, Jernbaneverket will have to report that they have awarded a contract to you. You shall report, the contract shall be reported to the Central Taxation Office, and information about the employees also to the Central Taxation Office, and information about pay, tax deductions, etc., to the tax collector. In general, as a foreign contractor in Norway, you will have the same obligations as if you were a Norwegian employer. However, the standard systems that we have in Norway for Norwegian employers does not necessarily work for you. Therefore, we have a special office, central office for foreign tax affairs that takes care of you. So no local social security office, no local tax office, no local, any office really, should be your dialogue partner around these things. They are special offices for foreign affairs, both with respect to social security and taxes. We have given, and I think it has been made available, kind of a country report which deals with these things in more detail, and where you also can see that these reporting obligations have certain penalties if they're not fulfilled. I will not go into details about it, but this is very important, especially when you go down the chain, that you maintain control over this reporting. It's very important. Social Security, we will spend about 15 seconds on. You will have to pay, as an employer, 14.1, and the employee will be charged with 8.2, unless you are members in a Social Security system in the employee's home country, and you're paying these contributions there. That has to be documented. In general, these things apply only to EU or EEA countries, but we have some particular agreements, for instance with Serbia, old Yugoslavia, which we had bilateral agreements with before, that works more or less the same. But if you bring workers from Korea, this does not apply. Then it means you have to pay these things, and these things have to be charged and paid to the Norwegian Social Security. This is very important, because if you come as a Korean to Norway, you are also then obliged to cover these employees with occupational injury insurance and pension schemes according to Norwegian law. We will deal with that at the end. It's in the presentation, it's in the country report, but these are important things that you need to keep in mind. Tax liability. If these workers are employed by a Norwegian employer, for instance, in the joint venture which is incorporated in Norway, or if they're hired into a Norwegian company, they are from Spain, they're hired into the joint venture, or if they are employed by a foreign company, which is in itself here with a permanent establishment in Norway. This means that they shall be taxed in Norway from the first day. The employee can also be taxable in its own right by virtue of his or her own stay in Norway, which is stated here. These things are more relevant in your case. They will either be employed directly in your joint venture, probably, or employed by one of the joint venture partners, which will be regarded as having a tax liability, a permanent establishment in Norway. As I just mentioned initially, as an employer in Norway, you will have the same obligations as if you were a Norwegian company, basically. Which means that you will have to make tax withholdings based on electronic tax cards, monthly, transfer it to the Norwegian special withholding account. In Norway, you have to issue payslips according to Norwegian law. There's nobody here from Latvia. But I was in Riga, and I explained this to them, and they say, what is a payslip? They don't have it. They know what their pay should be, and they get it in the bank. I said, well, the payslip is the receipt. Oh, never heard of it. Well, you go to Norway, you need a payslip. You have some reporting obligations and end-of-year obligations that needs to be fulfilled. All these things can be done on paper, not recommended. It's recommended to set this up locally so that you have a Norwegian salary system that can do this electronically to the tax authorities. It will save you a lot of hassle in the other end. There are some tax aspects that needs to be considered, mainly that a foreign company will be tax liable to Norway from the first day of work, really, but exempted under tax treaties that Norway has with other countries, and depending on the project's duration, either 6 or 12 months, which is the main division, so to speak, either 6 months period or 12 months period. This permanent establishment triggers a lot of other obligations that one need to be aware of. For projects, as I said, the normal building construction installation, of course a tunnel of this magnitude that we're talking about will be a permanent establishment for you. It will last for 5 years. So we will not make a huge discussion about this. The point is that when you get this tax liability, you are actually, I'll just try to illustrate here, if you start working now, preparatory works now, making some fundaments now, then start working in 2016. The whole period in between shall also be regarded as part of your project period. So it's from first time you actually did something here under the contract until you switch off the lights in the other end. The main principle is that you then shall pay taxes as a company of the activity you have in Norway. And there are rules, of course, here, and transfer pricing aspects that you need to consider. These are things that you discuss with your tax advisors. But you need to have a good grip on it. You should be aware that you will be asked to pay advance tax in Norway once you're recognized as tax liable, but you can apply for something that we call the complete contract method, which means you pay all the taxes at the end. Maybe something to consider. If you don't know which way this goes, well, then you defer all your payments of taxes to the end, and then you pay on the actual profit. We have had situations where people have been asked to pay advance tax in year 1 and 2, and everything is going great, and they're paying this, and then suddenly something happens, and they suffer a loss, and a total loss on the project, and then you have to go back for 2 years and make your tax returns again, to reflect the fact that you're not going to pay tax in Norway. And the only one getting rich from that process is your tax advisor. They make money. You don't. Something about tax returns, as I said, and payment. And for partnerships, the partnerships as a joint venture is transparent. So net profit or loss is covered by the partners. Which means that there is a little bit extra bureaucratic hassle with setting up accounts, both for the joint venture and for the partners, and regulating this correctly. But it's not rocket science. It has been done before. For value-added tax purposes, you need to register. You need to have a representative, at least the foreign companies. If you incorporate a joint venture in Norway, that joint venture does not need to have a VAT representative, but the foreign entity, if the foreign entity is supplying services to the joint venture, those transactions will be seen as VAT liable, and also the foreign company needs then, the foreign partner in the joint venture needs to be registered for VAT. So basically, every man and his dog in the contract chain belongs in here somewhere. If you're hiring out labor, which is sometimes a solution in a joint venture, that you have the joint venture as the only responsible party, and then you have, you're just hiring resources from abroad into it, then you are not in the VAT situation. So these aspects need to be considered and discussed with your tax advisors. I've just made an illustration here. This will also be available afterwards, of course, of how these processes are with invoicing, customs clearance, etc. So if you're sending goods in, your machines or anything, they shall be cleared in the name of the foreign entity's name or the joint venture, care of the VAT representative, and you will deduct all VAT, etc. afterwards in your VAT return. No deposits or anything, just pure transaction in and out. Unfortunately, in Norway, for those who have been working in the EU before, many of the EU countries, they have just a credit. So you just calculate the import VAT, but you never pay it. In Norway, we pay. Then you get it back again afterwards as a transaction. Norwegian bank accounts are recommended strongly, gentlemen and ladies, because Norwegian tax authorities only make transfers to Norwegian bank accounts. So you need to set up an operation with banks. Yeah, I've just illustrated also how this reporting and settlement of VAT, and it's just for information at this time. We will not go into it. Now we will talk about labor law, which is one of the major concerns in this project and one of the things that I've been asked to cover. This is the front page of the newspaper you saw outside, DN. It's the biggest business newspaper in Norway. This is a picture of our prime minister at the time. It's breaking news. They had huge problems politically when he was in government last time, and for a long period of time he was very unpopular. And his party was like 22–24% on the polls. Then suddenly he became popular for some reason, and he was the largest. The Labour Party was the largest in Norway again. Breaking news. Breaking news. This is a lady that was hired in an organization called NTNU, which is good and well known in Norway. She was hired on temporary contracts for a couple of years. Then they put out an announcement in the newspaper, and we want this position covered. She applied for the job. She didn't get it. This is the lady. This is the breaking news, important political issue. Can you see the balance here? Can you imagine? This is one lady that had one problem with one employer. Imagine 50 workers not getting the salary they should, not living as they should, not having their own bed, not having their own bathroom. Jernbaneverket supports slave contracts. Okay? This is a major concern for all Norwegian principals. Must be avoided at all times. Follobanen project will be one of the most controlled projects in Norway. The labor inspection will be all over you, and the same will all the labor unions. The labor unions will cover that in about 5 minutes, have an independent role as inspectors here. So you will need to really be diligent on this. Labor law. Here, this was the introduction. So for one thing, in the Netherlands, maybe, or in Sweden, our neighbor country Sweden, it's very common to have freelance workers or self-independent workers as a carpenter that works as a carpenter for me as a private person and then goes and works for NCC or some other contractor as an independent worker. In Norway, it's virtually impossible. In Norway, if you look like an employee, are treated like an employee, and you act as if you were an employee, then you are an employee. Regardless of whether you have your own limited company and hire yourself out as an independent contractor. Okay? This is of great importance because everything else hangs on this. When it comes to your obligations, who is making the insurances, who is responsible for people falling down, who is responsible for people getting sick. Everything hangs on this. Don't be creative. In the Bjørvika project, I mentioned there's also a tunnel out here. And when this tunnel was built, the contractor was one of our clients. When I say client, it's the client of the accounting firm, and then all the information is public. So this is public information. When they came, they had 40 independent Polish contractors, single-person companies coming to work in the tunnel. Of course, cannot be done. Why would they have it? Well, because an independent worker is not covered by the minimum salary regulations. So they thought that was a clever idea. So then I can pay him 70 instead of 120 or whatever the minimum salary was at the time. But it cannot be done. It cannot be done. Clever schemes like that must be just avoided. And this is, in other countries, it's okay to do this. It's all right. Everybody does it. It may not be strictly by the book, but everybody does it, and everybody's happy doing it. In Norway, it should not be done. So it's important to make these distinctions because of all these obligations that follows from the status of this private person. So there are definitions, of course, in the law. I just quoted them briefly here. There's also in this country report, so you can read them there. And you can talk to a labor lawyer about it to make sure that you are in compliance. We were also talking a little bit about posted workers. A posted worker is a worker that works in another country than he usually works. So I'm working in Norway, but now they're sending me to Turkey for 2 months for a project. So I'm a posted worker for those 2 months, which gives me certain rights according to an EU directive about posted workers. The EU directive, of course, gives the posted workers within the EU certain rights, but not necessarily valid if you have workers from Japan or Korea or China. So that needs to be looked into so that you know which legislation you are supposed to follow. I'm not giving you the answer with the 2 lines under here because it can be complex. Subcontracting, of course, payment, plans, etc. These are things you know, and hire in labor. What you should be aware of in Norway is that in Norway we are all social democrats. Even our right-wing party, a very right-wing party in the government now, is a social democratic party in its sort of soul, which means the protection of the worker is very strong, very strong. In Sweden, they have 35% of all people working in lower administrative functions in private companies are hired in temp agencies. You know? So they're employed in a temp agency, but they're hired out and they work somewhere else. 35%. In Norway, the portion is 2-3%. And it was, by the former government, considered a huge problem. All right? So it's a mentality here which is different, okay? So when you come to Norway, you are required to follow these regulations regarding, can I hire someone or do I need to employ them? And it's very important that you make that distinction and that you are aware of it. It's very important because of all the obligations that follows from that relationship. So basically you have an employment agency, employer, a worker which is employed, and a company hiring in. So there are 3 parties here. And you need to have agreements between all these parties. And you need to make sure that the conditions, the pure conditions for hiring in, that they are according with the Norwegian legislation, which basically says you are allowed to hire out. There are restrictions hiring in. So if I have a shipyard, shipyard is a cyclic business, like building and constructions can be sometimes. You have a huge project, you have 2 projects, so you have capacity problems. So you can hire in 50 workers to take out because of the capacity. You didn't plan for 2 projects at a time, it was difficult. But as a shipyard, you cannot say, oh, I had 1 ship, and then I had another ship, and then I had another ship. Oh, so it's cyclic business. So I hire 400 people at all times. No. You can hire for the additional needs, for the temporary needs, but not for the permanent needs. Then you employ. Then you employ. Generally, you can make employment agreements with your workers according to your national law, but when you come to Norway, you need to follow certain Norwegian regulations. Our recommendation is the following. You have your basic agreement, as in the bottom of there, and you have an additional agreement for the work in Norway. And the additional agreement shall be detailed. It shall not say, well, you're getting paid according to Norwegian law and regulations whatsoever as they are known. No, it should be ding, 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 detailed. Norwegian Holiday Act should not be referred to, but quoted. This means that you are entitled to 25 days of holiday during that period, 3 weeks, and here and there and everywhere, according to Norwegian law. Not just general referrals. And why is that? Because when the labor inspection comes, or somebody else comes and want to check what's going on there, they will say, can I get a copy of your employment agreement? Yeah, sure, here. Okay. So how about holiday pay? Have you received any holiday pay? And he doesn't know about any holiday pay because it's only referred to the Holiday Act and he just started, so he doesn't know about any holiday pay. So, what holiday pay? Ah, you're not getting holiday pay. Slavery contracts, and here we go. Okay? And then afterwards, when the dust sort of has fallen to the ground again, and everybody realizes that our friend here just came, he isn't entitled to any holiday pay before next year. But he should be aware of the fact that he has that right. Okay? Otherwise, you will spend a lot of time discussing problems which are not there during the project. Subcontracting or hiring of labor, I will not go into too much detail other than saying that to the extent that you are going to use own subcontractors or hire in from other sources workers, make sure that you have good, clear agreements that really makes it to the point what this is. Some years back, I got this agreement from a Norwegian party. They wanted me to look through it, and I went through it. And in this introduction here from the Jernbaneverket, it says, in the very beginning, it said something about Norwegian contract standards, the NS standard. And the contract that I was given was written on the NS standard for subcontracts. I could tell because it says so in the bottom text. But when I started reading, I said, oh, I didn't really recognize the text here. Well, so much differences. What is this? So I picked up the phone and I called them and I asked, what is this? And they said, well, we just took the subcontracts and we rewrote it because it's a hire of personnel contract. Okay, so why didn't you use that standard then? Oh, we didn't have it. Ah, so we just rewrote the other. But I cannot really say that this is a hire of personnel contract either, because there are a lot of things missing that I would expect that was here, you know. So it's my colleague here, he says it's a subcontract. I think it's a nothing contract, and she says it's a hiring of personnel contract. Which means we don't really know what it is, and the labor inspection may take one view, the tax collector another view, and the Central Taxation Office a third view. And they're all independent of each other. They're not required to follow the interpretation of the former, which means that you can be in a situation where one instance is treating you as if you were an employer of these people, and another instance treats you as if they were independent of you, which makes it difficult to navigate. So we say, make these clear agreements. In Norway, this is not mentioned here. Maybe it should. We apply the substance over form principle. In the US, they would call it the cut through the crap principle, which basically means that if you write something in your contract, that's good. If you don't live by what's in the contract, and then you have a discussion, then it might well be that we're not really focusing on the formal agreement anymore. For instance, the tax authorities, they will say, okay, so you have a subcontract, but you act as if you have a hire-in of labor contract, and that is what we think you have. We think you just made up this other contract, because in your day-to-day practice of your relationship, you act differently. So we just disregard the contract. I mentioned this about limited access to hiring of labor. This is much more information about in the country report, so you can go there and look at it there. Just make sure that you understand that there are specific limitations in the Norwegian laws. If you hire, this is just one point, hire out labor or hire in labor from an employment agency. It's allowed, of course, for certain, if you can say that, okay, I could have employed them temporarily, but I can also employ them here hire them for a limited period of time, for instance. If you hire from a manufacturing company, a company which is in its nature not a temp agency but a production company itself, there are certain limits also with respect to how this manufacturing company is acting that needs to be considered. I will not go into details about it, but you will need to be aware of it. We have specific regulations in Norway, which you also have in the EU, regarding the temporary agency workers directive. And for all of you that comes from the EU, forget about how you did it in your own country, because you came to Norway now. And we implemented this directive so thorough, you wouldn't believe it. An EU directive normally says that the member state may and the member state shall. Okay? In Norway, we said the member state shall and then some. Okay? So it's very strictly implemented. And in the first round, when the government presented how they were going to solve it, the labor union were not satisfied. So they came up with additional requirements to make it even more clear. Okay? So there are specific things that you need to be considering. For instance, if you hire in a carpenter here and you have your own carpenter there, these guys are going to have the same salary. But not only the same salary, also the same working conditions, overtime regulations, holiday regulations, whatever regulations. They shall be treated equally. If you hire in from somebody a category of worker which you don't have in your own business, then you must look to the market, so to speak, the undefined market. What would this person have as conditions if we had him in our own organization? So it can be complicated. We are talking about equality in terms of pay, cash and kind, extras and bonuses. The only thing which is not covered here actually when you hire from a temp agency is the pension. They didn't know how to solve it, so pension is outside. But the rest shall be equal. I will illustrate this here. We have a company here, and we have, this is the temp agency then, and we have somebody that needs a working, additional workers. The additional worker is here, with huge biceps and this machine actually. And this is the reason why I'm using this chap. He's no longer the leader of the Norwegian labor union, but his face is much more known than the new one. So I still use this one. so I don't need to explain who he is in Norway. He was very famous in his time. So what you need, this company needs to provide relevant information to the temp agency about all work and pay conditions in their company. They shall then document that they fulfill all these obligations in terms of paying that person. And they shall give all the information to him as well about so that they have received from the company hiring in. And the employee representative here shall also be given the same relevant information if requested. I gave this presentation in Sweden. They were like, but in Sweden, the temp agencies in Sweden have 98% coverage in collective agreements. Almost all the temp agencies are in a collective agreement for temp agencies. But this is not so common in Norway, so therefore this directive has been implemented much more in another way. Working hours. You're allowed to work for 40 hours. If you work in a tunnel, much less, because it would be shift work or straining work. So you have reductions in a tariff agreement. And because you are all tenderers to a public contract, we will cover that in a 5-second session later, you need to follow the collective agreement in that respect, also in terms of working hours. Which means that if you are going to have people working more than 40 or 37 or 33 maybe, according to certain, if you work in certain conditions under the tariff agreement, you need to apply for it. You need to do something to get approval for it. Otherwise, you're violating the law. You can not plan for overtime. You can say, okay, I have overtime now because my machine stopped. I need to finalize this work today. You get 2 hours. Fine, that's okay. That's overtime. That's normal. Not scheduled overtime every day is illegal. But you can apply for a rotation scheme. You can do something. You can say an average calculation of working hours during, for instance, a 4-week period or a 6-week period. You should notice that the labor inspection in Oslo, which will be monitoring also the Follow-on project, have a strict interpretation of this. They would normally not allow more than, they have told me, more than 4 weeks in a rotation period. They think that when you're working in a tunnel, it's so straining work that 6 weeks of work in a row before you get some time off will be too straining for the worker. So this needs to be considered and checked out thoroughly before you start planning your rotation schedules. There are three alternatives in the law: personal, application to the labor inspection, or agreement with workers' association. In general, this one is the most, actually, the most liberal. If you allow your workers to be members in a Norwegian collective agreement, and you then negotiate with the labor union, usually they take the most liberal approach to this. Because they are more experienced. Labor inspection can be very formalistic about it. Rigid. You'll need to have employment agreement, as I said, written, and there are a lot of mandatory mandatory requirements that needs to be in there. We will not go into the detail there. Then we're going to talk about the second topic that Jernbaneverket wanted me to cover, and that is social dumping. Social dumping is happening when a foreign employee is given significantly poorer pay and working conditions than would apply for a Norwegian. It's not only pay, it's a lot of things that can be considered social dumping. And this is one of the things which is a main focus area in public contracts, and which also is a main focus area within building and construction. So you have, it's something you need to understand, an issue that you need to understand. As I said, lack of safety training is social dumping. This guy is socially dumped. 15 meters above ground. And this is not actually fixed to the wall. He's fixing it to the wall. So he's standing there and fixing it to the wall with no... I think he has made some arrangement here with his belt, so it cannot be seen. But it's not very good. It's not according to the health and safety regulations. And as Jernbaneverket says here, we are very concerned about this. So please, this is lack of training is social dumping. This is living conditions. In this house, there were 30 Polish workers. It was in January, 2-3 years back. It was very cold. And, no, sorry, it was November. And it was very cold. And there were, sleeping many people in the house. The house was old. So all these workers, they went down to a local shop and they bought some extra heating ovens. But the electricity cables, etc., in this house was also old. So the fuses were only 10 ampere. 10 ampere. So when you plugged in all these heating elements, the fuses popped. So it didn't work. So what do you do then? Of course, you take out the fuse, you put in a spike, a nail. The nail doesn't pop, so then you get electricity. You short circuit the fuse, and then you go to sleep. Then, because of these very small cables, they started heating up. The fire started, and the lights went out, and 7 people did not come out of that building. One of my clients, it's called Hent. This is public information. It's a huge construction company in Norway. They are using this in their health and safety training for their project managers. People shall not live like this, they say. If this happens in one of your projects, you're fired. You're fired. So you need to inspect the living conditions of the persons on your project. Of course, you will here have barrack rigs, etc. But this is just so that you understand. Hot beds will probably not be approved. You understand the concept of hot beds when you're working shifts. So I'm not in my bed because I'm working shifts, so he can sleep in my bed. And then he goes to the shift and I can sleep, like in the submarine. yeah. But this will not be accepted here. That will be social dumping, okay? So we have a lot of measures here. If you come from outside the EEA area, you will have to document that you have decent working conditions. If you are a skilled worker or if you are an engineer or something, there's actually requirements as the level of salary. It's fixed in the regulation, the minimum salary you shall have as an engineer. If you are an EE national, you have this application, the minimum wages. You have the Norwegian legislation, but you also have specific conditions in your agreements with Jernbaneverket that needs to be met. So your principal, your customer, shall inform you. It's happening now. And you shall then, as part of the contract work, also confirm that you will go, or you're going to follow all these regulations, so you need to know what there are. And the contract with Jernbaneverket will probably mention that if something like this happens, then they can hold back payments. You should notice that formally Jernbaneverket can hold back payments not only to you, but also if you have a subcontractor, which they suspect are not doing what they should, then they can hold back money to you. They can, formally they can. Statoil did this in a couple of huge oil installation projects. And it was the subcontractor. So they picked up the phone and they said, listen, your sub are not doing what they should, so we're holding back the 10 million euros that we're supposed to pay her now until you fix it. Well, it was fixed very quickly. And then somebody would say that this is not proportionate. You know, you cannot hold back 10 million euros because of 500,000 whatever in the sub. But Statoil didn't really care about that. They just said, this is according to the contract. We can and we will hold back payment. So in the public contracts, you have the same information that needs to be put in there. All your workers will need to have an ID card like this. It's so small, so I blew it up a bit here so you could see it. It says a health, environment, and safety for the building and construction business. The name of the company that this person is employed in, the VAT number of this company, the name of this person, the sex, you know, and the date of birth. Then the signature and when it was issued. And all workers are required to have this at all times, and I will recommend that these processes are started fairly early, because you actually need to have all these registrations with the tax authorities and VAT authorities, and all must be in place before you can get the actual ID card. And this makes it very easy then, of course, to monitor your project site, because everybody needs to have that card available and visible when they're working. You should be aware that, of course, the labor inspection as a public authority, they can access, they can ask, what are your working conditions? What's more important is that a representative from a labor union can do the same. And if they do it, you have to disclose the information, or you may have to disclose the information, depending on whether you are in a public contract, just a public contract, or if you are in a contract where which has been made like a law, which is also mentioned here and in the country report that you have, as a generally applicable wage agreement. The labor inspection has a role here, and they will probably take a role. I'm not going to quote these clauses, but as referred to in the Jernbaneverket's brochure, they are required to ask these things from you, and they will do it. And it's important that you spend time understanding it, so that you don't make mistakes out of lack of knowledge. We have a Portuguese company working in the middle of Norway now in a tunnel, and they are working for a joint venture consisting of a foreign partner and a Norwegian partner. And we gave them advice about these things and said that you must figure out, because nobody had told them anything about the minimum salaries, you know. So when we told them, well, your workers shall have at least, approximately at that time, 20 euros per hour, they were like, 20 euros? You know, in Portugal they get 9. And we said yes, and in addition to that, they shall have ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, probably. But you need to discuss this with your customer, with the joint venture. But nobody in the joint venture really knew, or wanted to tell them exactly, which created a lot of uncertainty, of course. So this will also be applicable to you. If you hire somebody else, you must inform them in the same way. It's very important, because if they come in as a sub, and then start working, and then suddenly you are in a situation where they haven't understood these things, then we create a lot of noise and hassle for nothing. So, which wage agreement will apply in a public contract? And the answer is, I don't know exactly at all times. The fact that you're working in a tunnel, does that mean that you shall follow the collective agreement regarding what we call private anlegg, which is usually applicable for the people that works on public roads? It might, but not if you're an electrician. Yeah? But what if you're a steel worker? What if you're a steel worker and you are, in fact, member in a collective union that for the steel workers? Well, then that applies. So this is a difficult area to navigate in, and you need to spend some focus on it. This is actually it's a public building, and they were changing these facades here. What they're doing is they're taking off all the old facade, and they're putting new glass and aluminium facade in there. And there was some discussions here, because the company from Lithuania that did this work, they followed the general application, the general wage agreement, but they did not apply the specific the compensation for food and lodging. So there was a huge discussion about that for weeks, and then it was settled that they also needed to follow that specific rule regarding the level of compensation for food and lodging. So in this total project, it was less than pocket money, but it was 11 articles about it during a 2-month period, you know, where this came up and up and up and up, you know, the development of the case, etc. So and this is kind of a focus which, you know, compared to the amounts we're talking about, are really insignificant, but the amount of focus is very disproportionate. We will not deal with work permits, etc., because that's covered very well in the, I think, in the general report there. And there's also very much information in the Norwegian authorities' homepage. This concept is important. It is important because in Norway this concept of joint liability has been introduced in several areas, so that if you fail to report a subcontractor, then you may be responsible for the subcontractor's obligations and fees and taxes altogether. If you're covered by a general application of a general wage agreement, then you may also be responsible for that subcontractor's payment of wages. So think about that for a second. I have an illustration here. This is you, or the joint venture, and you have a sub somewhere. that person comes over to you, your office one day, and he says, listen, I used to work on this project on the follow line. I stopped working 2 months ago. And I now learned that I should have at least 182 NOK per hour plus, but I didn't get that. I got something else. So you see, my employee, my employer is a gangster. So I'm afraid of him, so I cannot talk to him. So I talk to you because I know you are an honest company, and you need to pay me the difference. You have 3 weeks to settle that claim. 3 weeks to settle the claim, to find out, did the person actually work there? What is the truth? Do we need to pay? Or yes, you need to pay because the claim was presented to you. So if you have paid afterwards, of course, you can take it down to the employer, but you need to pay in the meantime. So this means, of course, also for you that it's very important in your agreements with your subcontractors, companies that you have been working with for years. What happened when MT Højgaard from Denmark won the Hardanger Bridge project? What happened then? Did MT Højgaard suddenly start using a lot of Norwegian subcontractors? No. They brought everyone they knew from Denmark. Companies that they had been working with for years, companies they knew, they were friends and buddies all together. One of the major things that happened on the Hardanger Bridge was that the electric contractor socially dumped all their Polish workers, which was, of course, in strict, was not according to the agreement with MT Højgaard or with the State Public Road Authority, but they still did it. But this was a company that had been working for years in Denmark and Germany and other places, and because of lack of information, maybe, we're not sure, but it was a huge problem, a lot of writings in the newspapers about it. So even you know these companies from before, they shall really receive a good, thorough briefing from you so that they understand their issues, because you will be responsible also for them. This is the last point. Occupational injury insurance is not the same as an accidental injury insurance. I explained the difference to a foreign client yesterday, because he said, Torbjørn, I have accident insurance for all my workers whenever. So do I need to have this also on top of it in Norway? And I said, yes, because your workers are already members in the Norwegian Social Security scheme. And why are they members? Because they're not members in their home country. Why are they not members in the home country? Because you are from Germany as an employer, but all your workers live in Poland. So the German company does not pay Social Security to Poland for the workers that they are using globally. That's why they need to be members in the countries that they work. Then you also need this one. And he said, yeah, but I already have this fantastic scheme. Okay, remember then, this is not an accident insurance. If I sit in the KPMG building for 15 years, which I have already, and last year they changed floors, the tiles on the floors, and in a couple of years from now, I will start feeling a little dizzy in the morning after a couple of days with hours at work. And then I start to get sick, and then a couple of years later they find out that there are some gases coming from those new tiles that I react on. Only me. Out of 1,000 KPMG employees, I get something from those tiles. It's a freak incident. Yeah? It's 1 in 1,000, and I get sick from it. Okay? This covers it. So it's not an accident. This covers the employer's total liability, and it is a joint effort between the Norwegian state and the insurance companies. Okay? So they decide, Torbjørn, your lungs have been reduced by X, so you are 30% disabled. Okay, so I get 30% pension from the state and 30% from my insurance company. So this is why it's so important to decide, are the workers members in the home country? Are they members in Norway? Do we have exemption? Do we not have exemption? And this is not a piece of paper. It's not an A1 certificate that you can get somewhere along the line. You need to have these things in order very early in the project. This is an actual case. Consortium or joint venture consortium between 3 parties, and somebody is hiring out, and instruction authorities is established. And the consortium has this sort of front to the client, and who is the employer? And I said, I don't know. But there is an employer somewhere. So somebody should make sure that these guys are insured. I don't care who. Really, I don't care who. But somebody must, because you're all jointly liable. You're all jointly liable. So you cannot say, according to the agreement, I'm not responsible. You are all jointly liable. If you bring in workers which are insured also in your national security at home, you should consider, just for reputation, to put in some additional, of course, insurance for them while they are in Norway, so that they are perceived to be treated equally, even though this is more of a, it's not a legal requirement, it's just a recommendation, okay? But there was a project a couple of years back where a Lithuanian fell down and died. It was a freak accident. He was insured in his home country. He was brought home and, of course, buried. And the Lithuanian company, it was a white company. It was a serious company in Lithuania. So they paid out the 50,000 euros or whatever, according to what they should in their home country. But you know what the newspaper, local newspaper said? You know, socially insured in Lithuania, 50,000 euros. If he was in Norway, 500,000 euros. Social dumping, slavery, slender, and a lot of noise. So it's just a thought to take with you. Also, if there are members in the Norwegian Social Security, you shall have pension schemes for them in Norway. So, Korean worker, Norwegian pension scheme. But of course, they can bring their rights back to Korea when they finalize from the project. That was really it. It was Norwegian mandatory requirements and statutory requirements in 47 minutes. Questions? I will be around during lunch. You will probably also have my contact details afterwards. I made this gentleman agreement with Jan and Jernbaneverket. Flip me an email. You know, you have received this report. Flip me an email. Torbjørn, on page 17, you write that. Could you please explain? I will. Okay? You will get a reply. I'll do my best. Okay? Thank you for your attention.